In the summer of 1518, the cobblestone streets of Strasbourg, a city within the Holy Roman Empire, became the site of a bizarre anomaly. A woman named Frau Trophäa stepped out of her home, walked into the street, and began to dance erratically. She had no control over her own body. There was no festival, no music was playing. She offered no rational explanation to the onlookers. She simply kept moving, dancing continuously for 6 grueling days. By the end of that week, her movements were clearly no longer voluntary. Frau Trophäa had become the first person to lose agency over her own physical actions. The affliction spread rapidly. Within a week, 30 other citizens had stepped into the streets to join her in this uncontrollable trance. This chart shows the timeline of the outbreak against the number of infected citizens. You can see how an isolated incident exploded into a localized epidemic. By the end of a single month, historical records show the number of victims climbed to 400 people. The physical toll was devastating. Victims danced until their feet bled. Many collapsed in the streets from severe dehydration and exhaustion. Eventually, some danced until their hearts simply gave out. If this sounds like a local legend, it is unfortunately entirely real. The events of that summer are heavily corroborated by civic, medical, and religious records written as the crisis unfolded. Which leaves us with a 500-year-old question: what kind of biological or psychological force can hijack the human body and drive it to dance until it dies? To find an answer, we first have to look at the response of the 16th century city physicians. Acting as early scientists, they distinctly rejected the standard superstitions of the era. They explicitly ruled out demonic possession or astrological interference. Instead, they delivered a medical diagnosis. They concluded the dancers were suffering from hot blood, an archaic theory suggesting that overheated bodily humors were causing the erratic behavior. Based on that theory, the doctors prescribed a counterintuitive cure. To treat an exhaustion-induced illness, they ordered the victims to dance even more, believing it would help them physically sweat out the sickness. The city government took this medical advice seriously. They constructed wooden stages directly in the public square, cleared market spaces, and even hired professional musicians to play alongside the victims. But this authoritative intervention backfired. By providing a stage and a rhythm, the city encouraged the frenzy, turning a localized crisis into a mass casualty event. The plague vanished by September, but it left behind a detailed trail of historical evidence. 500 years later, scientists began re-examining those records to identify a biological cause. The first modern suspect is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a naturally occurring toxic mold that frequently infects damp rye, the primary grain used for bread in 16th century Europe. Consuming it triggers severe physiological reactions in the body, primarily violent muscle spasms and intense, terrifying hallucinations. The connection becomes clearer when you look at the chemistry. Ergot shares the exact same psychoactive chemical root as modern LSD. Theoretically, a tainted food supply could explain the trance-like state of hundreds of victims. But there is a second modern theory: mass psychogenic illness. This is an extreme, contagious psychological condition where a community manifests physical symptoms resulting from collective trauma. Strasbourg in 1518 was a remarkably traumatic place to live. The citizens were enduring back-to-back years of famine, rampant disease outbreaks, and intense societal pressure. When environmental stressors become overwhelming, a community's collective nervous system can essentially short-circuit. The psychological weight translates into involuntary physical tremors and deep trance states. So we have two competing theories. One points to a biological hijacking via a poisoned food supply, while the other suggests a psychological collapse driven by an unlivable environment. This diagram outlines the primary flaw with the ergot theory. The toxic mold acts as a severe vasoconstrictor, cutting off blood flow. This makes days-long dancing impossible. An ergot outbreak would cause widespread gangrene, not frantic hyperactivity. But mass psychogenic illness also has a critical gap. Psychological hysteria can induce tremors and trances, but it rarely overrides the central nervous system enough to push the human body past the physical limit of death by exhaustion. Neither the biological nor the psychological suspect perfectly fits the parameters of what happened in Strasbourg. There is a persistent, frustrating gap in the modern autopsy. The dancing plague of 1518 serves as a record of the unstable connection between human psychology and the muscles that carry out its commands. It demonstrates how profound stress, whether delivered by chemical toxins or psychological despair, can override hard-mired survival instincts. Despite 5 centuries of scientific and medical advancement, we still cannot fully explain what possessed those citizens to dance themselves to death. The true cause remains one of history's most baffling unsolved mysteries. If you want to explore more strange anomalies from the past, click subscribe.